Tarek Sioufi, what one thing do you wish you'd have known 10 years ago?
I wish I had known that imagination was the greatest asset I could have today.
I love that. I love it. I love it. Is that partly driven by kind of the rise of AI and people shitting themselves that AI is going to take our jobs? And actually, the thing that we have that AI doesn't have is imagination.
Partly AI has, I guess, brought it to the surface for me in recent times. But I think at a very basic level, strategy is really simple but incredibly hard. It's simple in the fact that it's about getting from one place to another, but it's very difficult in terms of where you're trying to get to doesn't exist yet. And in order to be able to kind of envisage where you want to take a brand, you have to kind of dream it and imagine it. And that's true of strategy with or without AI being part of the conversation or not. And had I recognized that at an even earlier age, I might have been able to hold on to it, hone it, craft it, shape it, feed it more than I did. Um, yeah, I think it's always been invaluable. Strategy is a creative act, um, but yeah, more pertinent than ever before. I think AI will probably create a whole bunch of efficiencies. I'm not an evangelist and I'm not a kind of detractor. Um, I think we kind of anyone who claims to know the future and what will come with it at the young age of 45 now, I recognize that that's a fool's game. But what I do know is that actually it's going to be more important than it ever has been. It's a race to the top, not a race to the bottom. And a race to the top is the 1% most imaginative, lateral, counterintuitive, unexpected ideas. And I think the world's going to need a bit more of that.
I think the thing that we've got to look at as an industry and as a sector is like those 1% sometimes is how do we find them? And it can be hard sometimes, can't it? That clients are looking for things quickly, budgets maybe are not always where we'd want them to be. So sometimes, there's a push, direction, let's move faster. But we still got to look, we've still got to put ourselves to work and still got to back ourselves to find that little bit, that interesting bit that's going to elevate what we do and help our clients achieve the thing that they're trying to do.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, that's the job. That's the job of a strategist is to outline a position that we need to be able to get to, but also the most interesting, imaginative way of getting there. Because I don't think it's ever really as kind of straightforward as it seems. The rule number one of advertising, of any kind of communications, is if you don't cut through, you're dead in the water before you've even started. So following rule books, following frameworks, following the right and the wrong. Yeah, it's important to know all of that. It's important to know all the academics, but the application of that needs to be an imaginative application, because if you're not standing out, you're dead in the water. And I think strategy is a great kind of strategy, is the path to a brand being able to do that from the offset. So I think had I known when I was young that really that's what strategy was about, or at least that's my philosophy on it, then it would have been, I could have honed it even better than I have done today. But yeah, strategy is pretty simple, although incredibly, incredibly difficult to be able to get to that 1%. There are a million different factors that go into that. But yeah, I think that's essentially what I strive to do each and every day in my work, is to have the most imaginative, lateral, counterintuitive thinking that could create growth for a business or brand. That's what I do for a living, and it's partly about creating opportunity for that business to thrive, but also partly about creating a space where creativity can happen, and you can make a brand truly stand out, truly be loved, truly kind of engage with people. And the only way to do that is through, creative lateral thinking.
You said there about creating a space for the good things to happen. How much of strategy do you think is loosely termed operational, in terms of creating the conditions within your agency, creating the processes within your agency, to try and get away from this. We've got an hour in a meeting to come up with an idea. How much do you need to create that space in your role to allow great things to happen? And how much is just getting into the nitty gritty of it?
So along this we're going to go on a tangent now. A long time ago, I was told by a creative director that I really respected that the ideas weren't his ideas. That actually he was the vessel and they came to him, and that he didn't think of them; they just appeared in his mind. And I thought, what a load of absolute nonsense. Truth is,
I'm going to have to ask: are you allowed to name and shame?
before I do, I'm sure he wouldn't mind. I love the guy dearly. Before I do, let me just say that I, in fact, think that he's right all these years later. And I was told that about 20 years ago, and I thought, what a load of bollocks. Like, I am the vessel for the idea. And, I think every good idea has a moment in time, and it's whether or not it finds you and you find it. And if it doesn't, if you don't find it, it'll find someone else. And I truly believe that. I believe that the process is chaotic. It always has been, and it always will be, because you're dealing in the intangible, you're dealing in originality, you're dealing in something that doesn't exist yet. And these thoughts, ideas are formed in lots of different ways. So often it's about a couple of things. It's about having the right mental state to be able to kind of, for these ideas to to find you, if we want to get really kind of philosophical and spiritual about it. But it's also about setting the right kind of the right culture within an agency for that to be able to happen. I think panic and deadlines are good, but they're not always good at specific moments in time. There has to be an element of calm. There has to be an element of safety. I believe that people do their best work when they feel safe, i.e., you could say anything or go anywhere and not be judged for thinking a particular thing or saying a particular thing. I think within every good idea, you're trying to find the line of where that idea exists. You don't push far enough, it will fall by the wayside and be generic or commonplace. You push too far, and you might end up in a place where actually it's offensive or wrong or etc. So often you're trying to find the line for this idea of how far can I push it for it to be able to kind of be arresting, but still truthful, valuable, insightful, and elicit the right kind of emotion in people. And I believe that comes through a feeling of psychological safety. I think that's just the basics of human nature. We do our best work when we feel on firm ground, when we feel supported by those around us. And, we're often working in an industry where you are trying to stand out, and therefore original thought in many different kind of forms is really about how far can you push things sometimes, because it's about doing and saying things that haven't been thought of or done before. And that requires an element of kind of safety in and around yourself for the idea to be talked about and pushed in the right direction. So I often talk about how you need to have a really high bar for what you're trying to achieve, but then you're trying to create the right culture and environment to be able to kind of reach those heights, because fear and pushing alone won't do it. Neither will deadlines or panic or chaos.
Yeah.
So it's about having the space. I also think parameters are really important. Often I think strategy is about creating the space for creativity to flourish. What that means is it's a space with borders. Those are parameters. It's not we could do anything. It's we should do this. But for that space to be incredibly fertile. So a creative or myself, if I can go in 10 different directions within that space that all ladder up to the same kind of thing, they're answering the same kind of problem, that tends to be a good strategy. It's outlined that space, but it's incredibly fertile.
Yeah, I've talked previously on the show about how ballet is a creative endeavor, but
Mm-hmm.
it has boundaries. It has a stage, and all the main things you want people to see have to be viewable by the people at one side of the stage, not any of the other three sides.
Yeah.
And so it's similar in setting the boundaries. But to come back to your vessel receiving ideas, I am going to call it bollocks. I am going to call it bollocks, partly because everything you've just said, and partly because of what I'm going to say as well, is that this sort of idea of the genius going up the mountain and coming back with the great idea written on tablets of stone, I just think it's horseshit because of. But like what you've just said, that you've got a career that takes in some of the greatest agencies in London, in the world, in fact, and you read widely, you create that space within the agency for people to come up. You set those things. You go and I don't know. You go to the theatre, you go to the cinema, you go on holiday to different locations. All of that experience brings you to the point where you've read the client brief, you've embedded yourself in the client, you know what they're trying to achieve, you've helped set all these things, you've drawn all the boundaries.
Mm-hmm.
Now, you might be walking down the street when the idea hits you and go,
Mm-hmm.
shit, that's it. But that's
Mm-hmm.
not a bolt of blue from Zeus upon the mountain coming down and hitting you.
Mm-hmm.
That's 3 months of hard work and 30 years of experience. That's where it came from. There's no divine intervention here. It's hard work. It's blood, sweat, and tears.
Of course.
That's what it is. There are strategists wandering around going, do you know, my shit doesn't stink either, and I'm just this genius. And you're like, I don't know about
Here's
that,
the
mate.
truth, Andy. Like people say strategists are the smartest people in the room. I don't believe that to be true. I think strategists are some of the most imaginative people in the room. Now, if I could tell you how imagination works, I'd be a far richer, more successful, probably happier individual than I am today. I think you're right in terms of a lot of it is experience. A lot of it is, and I think a lot of it is experience, but because you're honing your gut. But that thought could have gone anywhere. It just happened to come to me, and I happened to recognize it. I was able to receive that thought. I was in the right frame of mind to go, isn't that interesting? And then to go with it and to use my experience and my gut to essentially go, that feels right. Often a lot of this stuff is about a feeling rather than a rational thought or a framework leading you to an answer. I think my personal kind of philosophy is that there are three modes of thought when it comes to devising a brilliant strategy. The first, which is in the past, is analytical thinking. Like, what happened in the past to lead this business and this brand to a particular moment in time, which happens to be today. The second mode of thought is that, which is critical thinking. I think too many agencies and strategists walk past the problem. I was very lucky that I grew up in a time in advertising industries and some great agencies that really drilled that into me hard and fast, which is you're here to solve business problems. And I think often we walk past that in the modern day and age a little bit too much. But that's the second part, is really understanding what led to this problem today and really being able to articulate that. That takes critical thinking. Once you've done those two parts, in fact, the last bit, which is what makes it really bloody difficult, is the imaginative leap. And every good strategy leaps into the future to create a particular state or position for a business or brand. And it might be about changing something in the world. It might be changing something in the brand or the product. It might be changing something in how we behave. But often it's about an imaginative leap into the future, which is what kind of world and position do I need to create to be able to solve that business problem? Now, I do that probably 100 times. 99% of those are utter rubbish that I would never want to go on a podcast and talk about. But sometimes you find one that you go, that's interesting. No one's doing that. That's fresh. And it solves the business problem. It stacks up. So I work in the future and then work back. Does it do all the things that I need it to do? And will it ultimately solve that business problem and create opportunity? So I think if that's the mode of thought, often the last stage, which is the kind of exploration stage where you're going into, your own thoughts. Yes, you're pulling on experience, but really, I do find that these kind of things just appear. You can't really explain how they've appeared because you weren't even thinking about something. Whether it's divine intervention, spirituality, experience, I don't really care, to be honest with you. But what I do find is that I often have to be in the right frame of mind for that thought to appear. And that's what makes it messy. I wish there was a process. I wish there was a way. But the process changes depending on the people involved. The how you develop an idea once it's been formed really depends. And every time it's a little bit different. So I believe in process, but I don't believe in process, i.e., it's there as a facilitator of something. And sometimes you take different steps at different points. There are other people in the industry that talk about leaving space for luck to happen, for example. I wholeheartedly believe in that too, because sometimes you need a bit of luck. Something might happen. You might see something that actually sparks a thought. You might often you have to leave things kind of open for things to be able to present themselves to you, whether that's luck or experience or brilliant thinking. I don't know, but I tend to think that the older I get, that actually, you do have to just be able to kind of tune into the world in a way where these thoughts, you're receptive to these thoughts. There's some brilliant creatives that I've worked with who have been described as crazy. And I always kind of went, I actually don't think they're crazy. I think, in fact, they have an incredible freedom and elasticity to their minds and their imagination. It goes to places where other people's don't. And that is usually where sometimes you might find some scary thoughts, but actually you're going to find yourself in fresh territory if you have the kind of elasticity of mind to be able to go there. So I think things like daydreaming, wandering, letting your mind go off, a freedom of mind is really, really important when you're trying to create original thought.
So to come back to scary thoughts and something you said earlier as well, like if you push work too far, or you can sometimes up being offensive. You were involved in what is surely known as the most offensive Christmas advert of all time.
Yeah, I don't know about that, but yes.
Sorry, we're laughing because you explain what the offensive Christmas ad was, and tell us the story. Then we'll kind of dive into how that came about.
Yeah, so I was working at Wieden+Kennedy during COVID, working on Sainsbury's, and it was COVID, obviously. So, Sainsbury's was one of the businesses that was absolutely booming in the country while most businesses are closed down. People were cooking more, experimenting more in kitchens, spending time in supermarkets because we were allowed to. So the business was absolutely booming. But as an agency, we had spent the majority of our time doing the regular seasonal campaigns, public service announcements, all of that kind of stuff. So we actually didn't get briefed on Christmas until I think it was around early October. Which was incredibly late for a Christmas campaign, and all the supermarkets were in the same boat.
Let me just pause you there for 1 second. So about 25-30% of the listenership is outside the UK. So just in terms of Sainsbury's is the second, maybe third biggest supermarket in the UK. Probably after Tesco. Yeah, probably second after
I think
Tesco.
second biggest, the oldest supermarket in the UK. But it's funny because at the same time as COVID, you were having, Black Lives Matters happening. Mm-hmm. Sainsbury's were kind of on a mission to become the most diverse retailer in the UK. So we were working with them on different kind of initiatives and things. But yeah, massive supermarket with kind of huge presence here in the UK and a rich history of brilliant, amazing, forward-thinking work. So great clients to be a part of. But again, obviously with COVID and keeping 2 meters apart, we'd spent a lot of time doing public service announcements and helping look after our staff and that kind of stuff. So Christmas came late. Christmas in the UK, especially for supermarkets, for people outside of the country who don't, it's basically the UK's Super Bowl. right? So it's a huge moment
Great
where
description. Yeah, it is.
yeah, where people want to see what ads are coming out. You know, John Lewis had huge success for years and years in that space. So a real moment in time
It's a,
in the UK advertising landscape.
it's a great comparison actually, because I generally spend most of my time saying nobody cares about your ad, because nobody
Yeah,
does. No one,
true.
it's just the thing that gets in the way of the programs a lot of the
Yeah,
time. But the Super Bowl, where people are like, oh, what are the ads going to be? Christmas is the same. What are John Lewis going to do? What are Asda? What are Tesco? And
yeah,
all the big companies, Amazon are in the in the race, and people are like, who's got the best Christmas ad?
that's
It
right.
is. It's the UK Super Bowl. So great,
And it's
great.
pure entertainment, right? I mean,
Yeah.
that's what advertising is there to do at Christmas time: entertain and get top of mind. So, late brief, come in, lots of panic, lots of like, oh my god, and
Mm-hmm.
again, the really tricky thing here was trying to get a handle on what the mood of the nation was,
Yeah.
because you never knew what was around the corner. So it
And
got,
you
yeah.
probably don't have the brief to hand, but can you give us a sense of what was the problem they were trying to solve? Was it just can you get us more awareness, or were they trying to position something at Christmas, or what were they
No,
trying to do?
it's Christmas for supermarkets and retailers. It's all about being kind of top of mind, and whoever wins the advertising race and has the kind of most emotional connection, people tend to shop there.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I mean, it's basically about how can you create the most loved Christmas ad to basically drive top of mind awareness and affinity for the brand. Because if you do, you're more likely to get people in store. Hugely competitive.
Yeah.
The retail landscape is anyway, but at Christmas time, it's more so than ever.
Yeah.
So really, it's about cutting through and entertaining the nation and people going, "I love that ad,"
Yeah.
because when they say that, they tend to shop there. So it was difficult to predict really anything. It was difficult to predict how people were going to feel a few months down the road when the ad went live. It was difficult to predict where people were going to be spending their Christmases. Would they be able to go back home to family, friends? Were they able to have people round at their place? Um, Difficult to predict how big of a Christmas people were going to have, because here in the UK as well, we love to kind of just go big at Christmas time, but
Mm-hmm.
people were being furloughed, losing their jobs, etc. So so much was up in the air in terms of being able to predict how people would feel, how they would act in that particular moment in time, because you didn't know what was going to happen tomorrow, let alone a few months further down the road. So there was a lot of kind of up in the air at that point. Even in terms of the competitive set, we had no idea where people were going to go. So what we really wanted to do was capture as much as we could the kind of sentiment of the nation, and create stories essentially that were true and real. We didn't want to kind of try and capitalize on being too entertaining, too fantastical. We wanted to be real, grounded, and emotional. So what we did was essentially land on a very simple insight, which was food has the power to transform or to transport you anywhere back in time. It can make you feel at home, even though maybe you weren't at home at the time. So, a very kind of simple insight based on a truth about home cooking. How one particular dish could really remind you of something. I mean, I'm Lebanese originally. We grew up having turkey on the table, but always with the side of hummus. So for me, it's not Christmas unless there's hummus on the table. So it came
Hey,
from
listen,
kind of very
I'm in for
simple.
this Christmas. I'm in. That sounds amazing. So
Yeah, it goes with everything. It's kind of like a
yeah.
condiment. It's like hot sauce. You can put it on anything. Um,
Perfect. So, so
so
people are listening to this right now and going, so you've talked about a supermarket, you've talked about a Christmas campaign, you've talked about an insight that's probably got people nodding, going, yeah, food does have that power. No one's listening thinking, why was this controversial? Why is it
yeah,
the most hated Christmas? Not the most hated, the most complained about Christmas out of all time.
yeah,
So, take us through the next step.
yeah. So food is home. Home is Christmas was the idea. We created a series of ads. So we didn't create one ad. We created these kind of short, sharp, sweet kind of moments that were about loved ones on the telephone together, and we would use kind of historical footage from previous Christmases, because obviously you couldn't go and shoot anything either. So we were kind of using a bit of a nostalgic take on what Christmas was for people, and conversations over the telephone about these lovely kind of moments that family members were connecting over. So we had different kinds of families from all over the country. There was a northern family that were talking about Yorkshires, and there was a southern family, and one of the families happened to be black. So at no point in the development of the idea did we think that, there was anything contentious in this kind of idea. But once the ad went live, the internet took full force in its Twitter sphere. I think it was still called Twitter back then. I'm not sure. I don't really remember. But the racists seemed to come out in full force and start talking about boycotting Sainsbury's because they featured a black family in their ad. That was that
like,
took me by surprise.
If you're watching, you'll see that I'm laughing, and I probably should be crying rather than laughing. This was the same time when I think, was it Yorkshire Tea or Tetley Tea, had people attacking them on Twitter for the same sort of thing and going, well, I'm never drinking this again. I'm only going to drink the other tea, and tagged them in it. At which point the other tea came back and were like, it's all right, Sandra. Don't drink our tea either if that's how you feel.
Yeah.
I'd call it a collective madness, but 5 years later, we're still in that same world where lunatics are emboldened by their opinions to tell everybody that this is how they should be carrying on. And you had a black family in an ad. My goodness.
In a Christmas ad, right?
In a Christmas ad, yeah. I don't know how you sleep at night. I really don't.
Well,
you people, wild. You woke advertising agency people.
Exactly. And it's just about representation of the nation is really all it was. We wanted to be fully representative. And Sainsbury's, are a very diverse organization. So for us, it wasn't even a
100,000 employees, right?
Yeah. But once that happened, my favorite part of the campaign is what we did after that, which was we got together with all the other supermarkets in the country, and Channel 4 helped us run a response ad, essentially, which was said, if you share the views of these people, then you're not welcome in any of the supermarkets across the country. And that ran on TV across Channel 4, and that was done really, really quickly. And it showed that even your competitors, you can unite around, a belief in humanity and a belief in the nation.
So that's really interesting, because I don't think I knew that end bit to the story, how they came together. And that in itself is unusual, isn't it? To get kind of the big supermarkets all agreeing to do something together is not an everyday occurrence, is it?
No, it's really, really not, especially, in one of the most competitive times of the year, Christmas. But good on them all, and good on Channel 4. But it was, about taking a stance on where we were as a society as a result of this. And I think, doing it in a unified way really kind of sent a message, I hope, to people out there.
Amazing stuff. And I think that maybe it goes back to one of your earlier answers, how sometimes, the idea doesn't always end up, we can't put too much science on some of the things that we do, because maybe the ideas end up in different places based on, from where you thought they were going to go. So if that took you by surprise, has there been any campaigns that you worked on that right from the beginning you just knew were going to be a home run? I mean, you do, like, sometimes there's a feeling. And look, one of the campaigns I worked on for a Chinese auto manufacturer, you knew early on it was going to succeed. And but there were reasons behind that. Once we saw how much they were going to spend on the media budgets, you were like, I don't think it can fail, to be honest with you. Really, you could do anything you want with it. But there was other success factors in there. But has there been something where maybe just the vibes were right from the start, and you're like, yeah, I think I know this one's going to go as a success?
Yeah. So here's the truth. I'm a relentless optimist. I think everything's always going to go brilliantly well. So I've probably felt that about everything I've ever made. But no, sometimes there are a few kind of moments things that happen, like sometimes I always strive to make work that doesn't need to rely on paid advertising spend. That's been a philosophy since I was very, very young, that like if it can earn attention and if it can get out, if it can be written about and talked about, that's the best kind of advertising, whatever shape or form it takes. So there's sometimes, there were some things that I worked on that I knew were going to be really well because they would go really well because they were genuine world firsts. We were doing things with technology that had never been done before, in really interesting ways. There's other things where you just go, "Oh, I love that idea. What a brilliant idea." One of them, I was at an agency called the Brooklyn Brothers for a very, very long time, 7-8 years I was there. We worked for the country of Iceland on tourism, and we made some work I'm really proud of in terms of that. But one of the briefs that came from the client was, we'd worked with them for a few years already. Iceland kind of, funnily enough, wasn't a destination that anyone had been to at that point. It was quite an insular kind of thing. Over the 10 years, it became one of the top 10 destinations in the world when we worked on it. And the brief changed every single time. So the first brief that we got was when the volcano went off, and it was the biggest closure of airspace across Europe since World War II.
And just for the promotional, just for the promo clips on social media, can you just pronounce the name of the volcano that went off, please?
I can't, Andy.
Oh, you coward! Give it a go.
I really can't. I really can't. I don't think anyone who's not from Iceland can pronounce that. I think that's a good challenge.
They actually put it on T-shirts now, all 743 letters of it, with what do you mean it was difficult to pronounce? And you're like,
But yeah, the brief changed every single time. So this brief was about changing the seasonality of Iceland. So right, you've got people coming in the summer, that's great, but how do you get people to come to Iceland in the winter? Was one of the briefs. This particular brief was more centered around, right, we've hit kind of maximum capacity in and around the Golden Circle, which is the kind of tourist hotspot in and around Reykjavik. How do we get people who come to Iceland to travel further and spend more time? So we landed on a few really simple things that were really counterintuitive, and that's what I love about some of the work that we did on Iceland. But essentially, that we outlined Google as the enemy, because the first thing that you do when you're looking to book a holiday is you hit Google, right? And you go, what are the best things to do? What are the best places to go? But because Google works on rankings of popularity, all you really get served is the most popular things to do, not the best things to do. So what we thought was, how do you usurp Google? Like, how do you do that? And that all of a sudden became a really interesting challenge. We then found an insight, which was very, very simple again, and another one that we built on top of it. So the simple insight was that Iceland is actually a land of secrets. There are 1 billion different things to do that most people, including Google, had never heard of. So some of the hot springs, I think, back in the 1800s, they built a pool that captured the water from the hot springs. You can't find it on a map, but if you ask a local, you'd know where to find it. So the idea was really quite simple, which was based around, don't ask Google, ask a local. We then found another thing, which was something along the lines of 92% of people in Iceland have the name Gudmundur in their name. That's partly because they have 6 or 7 names. And Gudmundur is both a boy's name and a girl's name. So 92% of people in Iceland have the name Gudmundur as part of their name. So we thought, rather than ask Google, what if we created the world's first human search engine, Ask Gudmundur? So it was a real-time social campaign that people all over the world were able to ask a Gudmundur from the north, Gudmundur from the volcano, Gudmundur from all over different parts of Iceland, to discover the secrets of Iceland. And we created something like 362 individual pieces of content, each with a different Gudmundur inside of it. And that became the world's first human search engine. One of the reasons I landed at Grey 10 years later was, and this is where coming full circle back to, are they your ideas, or do they just kind of find people? Grey, at the same time, was working with Sweden on their tourism campaign, and on the same day launched a very similar campaign, executed very differently, that was called the Swedish telephone number. And that was essentially a very similar thing, which was the best way to experience Sweden isn't to kind of hit Google, but it's to speak to an actual Swede. So they created a phone number that you could call from anywhere in the world, and you would be connected to a random Swede somewhere in the country to talk to them about what makes Sweden so brilliant. Those two things were being developed in silo at different points in times by different agencies in London on different countries. They have so many similarities to them from a conceptual level, but they were executed very differently. One was a telephone number, and one was a kind of real-time human search engine service.
And which one won the most awards at Cannes?
Grays. So that's why Swedish telephone number is one of the reasons I'm here. I think that is one of the best campaigns to come out of any agency in the past 50 years.
Well, I will use Google, not Goodmender, to find links to those campaigns and also the hated Sainsbury's campaign and put them in the show notes. If you're listening to this,
cool.
When people talk about campaigns, you sometimes have to see it to believe it. So we'll put links in the show notes to those. So you can,
that's all cool. And then recently, the work we've done for Stella Artois is some of my favorite work for very, very, very different reasons. A couple of things. So it was the campaign that was worth it. It was printing out of home. Very
describe briefly that campaign. It's kind of people stood in a very busy situation holding a pint of Stella.
Yeah, that's right. So a usual situation that a beer brand wouldn't go anywhere near. So you would never. One thing I love about it is it tends to it broke the kind of conventions and the rules of the category. So you would never show crowded bars. You would never show people kind of squeezed in together, especially in a post-COVID world. Things that you would never do because that would never be seen as premium. But what we were able to do, and one of the things I love about it was the brand was repositioning itself away from this idea of reassuringly expensive, which was a value play and a very good one, and they made amazing work on it. But what they were starting to lose was salience at that kind of key moment at the bar. That first order at the bar, whatever drink you order first is the one that you're going to carry on through the night. So first order is hugely, hugely important. And as you know, in the world of beer, it's so competitive now. I mean, like, it's absolutely insane, the competitiveness of that moment. And it tends to happen in a split second. So they were moving much more to a kind of emotional value play. One of the things we loved about it was that the brand was repositioning itself more around the sacrifice than, because the normal way to do it would be like, oh, moments worth more. And we didn't kind of, that is a very kind of generic, category-led kind of place, aspirational, fake friends enjoying fake drinks together,
everyone
selling
smiling and pointing.
But what we wanted to do was essentially sell the reality of it. So focusing on building the brand around a sacrifice, an emotional sacrifice that was made to then present the product as something that was truly worth more. So that's where the strategy started. And then the work itself, which I really love, goes against all the kind of elements of the category. So only 2 words, worth it. Very tightly constructed, very simple ads that were basically, again, built around a really simple insight, which is when it comes to nightlife, we often sacrifice personal space for the shared thrill of being with friends. That is a universal thing. We feel that all over the world, from Santiago in Chile to London to Dublin to wherever you are in the world. We've all been in that crowded bar situation, which is, oh, this is horrible. But the first sip kind of goes, oh, that made it all worth it, actually. So that idea that, like, we sacrifice personal space when it comes to nightlife was something that we really loved. And then the way we brought it to life was really all about restraint. How little can we say? How little can we show, so that we were leaving space for people to actually feel it? So as soon as you look at the ad, it floods right back in terms of how you feel the squeeze of the moment, and you feel the respite from the brand itself and the product itself. And that's what we really aim to do, was try and say as little as possible and leave the space for people to feel that familiarly negative thing, but also then quickly for them to kind of be brought into the familiarity of the joy of that product.
Amazing stuff. Amazing.
Yeah.
Well, look, thank you very much for taking us through 3, maybe even 4, the Swedish telephone number, different bits of work. It's been really insightful as to how you become the vessel for the creative ideas. But before I let you go, can you give a recommendation of a book, a podcast, a resource, or a course, or something you think other people who one day want to become as a vessel for genius ideas? Where would you send people?
On that theme, we're going to go extra spiritual, and we'll go Rick Rubin, The Creative Act. So if for people that know Rick Rubin, world-class producer, I never thought music production and strategy would have so many similarities. It's a spiritual book, but it demonstrates how the creative act itself is very much about the culture that you build in and around so that creativity can flourish. The idea that actually sometimes maybe it is a divine thing and these thoughts do come from nowhere and they're just looking for people. But I found it, you're supposed to read a chapter a day. I couldn't put it down, is the truth of it, because I was like, every chapter I read when he talks about something that happened in the creation of this great album. But he very much sees himself as a facilitator of great ideas, which I think is also what strategy is about. We are facilitators of creativity and great ideas. So there's lots of little nuggets in there that are kind of like, oh, I love how he handled that moment, that situation. I love the kind of vibe that he was building in order for those ideas to kind of really flourish and be built. So it's a wild book. It's not a strategic book, but it's got a lot of kind of similarities, and it's all about the power of imagination. So
How Brands Grow, I think he's over there, and it's a great book, and we've all got to read it. But if everyone's only read one book, we're only going to love that.
Well, dive into that one.
Thank you very much. That's a great recommendation.
Thanks for having me, man.
Thank you for your time.
Pleasure, man.